Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. My name is Margot Parmenter, and I'm the events coordinator at the Hub City Bookshop in Spartanburg, South Carolina. We're so excited to have you join us tonight for a conversation about author Nada Alic's debut story collection, Bad Thoughts, which is here. Isn't it so beautiful? The collection was published on Tuesday and has since been receiving positive coverage all over the place, from The Cut to LitHub to a really attentive, thoughtful review in the New York Times. I'm basically considering it a personal coup that I've managed to get these two writers here at all to our tiny little bookshop in the middle of nowhere. So I'm just really excited to have both of them here. Nada will be joined in conversation by Margaret Mehan, whose work you might know from outlets such as Electric Literature's Recommended Reading and Joyland. Her story, A Beautiful Wife is Suddenly Dead, is maybe one of my favorite things that I have ever read. So if you haven't read it, definitely jump over there and check that story out. Before I hand it over to our writers for the main event, I'm just going to quickly introduce the bookshop for anyone in the audience who might not know us. The Hub City Bookshop is an independent bookstore serving the literary community of upstate South Carolina. We're part of a larger organization called the Hub City Writers Project, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to cultivate readers and nurture writers. We do that by publishing original titles through our press, as well as by sponsoring a variety of literary programming in our community, including writers' workshops, book clubs, and author conversations like this one. Our most recent press book is Ashley Bell Peterson's The Crocodile Bride, which was recently a New York Times editor's pick. If you want to find out anything more about us, our organization, our mission, all our upcoming events, etc., please head to our website, hubcity.org, and sign up for our newsletter. Also, if you have yet to purchase your copy of the book, please know that you can click the button that says buy the book at the bottom of your screen and purchase the book directly from us. Just one final thing before I introduce our writers, please feel free to ask questions. We'll reserve some time at the end to answer them. You can use the ask a question button, or you can just drop them in the chat and we'll keep track of those. Without further ado, I'll introduce Nada and Margaret. Nada Alic is a writer in Los Angeles. Her story, The Intruder, was shortlisted for the 2019 CBC Short Story Prize, and her story, My New Life, was published in the journal No Tokens. In 2020, she was a recipient of a Canada Council for the Arts literary grant for her debut story collection, which is now here. She's currently working on a forthcoming novel. Nada will be joined in conversation by Margaret Mehan. Margaret's fiction appears or is forthcoming in Fence, Joyland, and Electric Literature's Recommended Reading. She received her MFA in fiction from Columbia University in 2020, where she was awarded the Felipe P. de Alba Fellowship and a Creative Writing Teaching Fellowship. She was nominated for the 2021 Penn Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers, and in 2018, she was a Tin House Scholar. She's currently completing a short story collection and a novel. Margaret and Nada, thanks so much for being here. I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Cool. All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Margot and Hub City. I'm so honored to be here. And happy Pub Week, Nada. It's been very exciting. I've been following it on social media. Congratulations on your glowing New York Times review, but perhaps even more prestigious than the New York Times, American icon and Renaissance woman Paris Hilton was photographed holding your book. That really impressed me, which I think makes me your ideal reader, because you so beautifully weave in, our pop culture preoccupations into your work. So yeah, let's talk about the book. I'm really interested to learn how this book came to be, because I know you didn't follow what has become this very conventional path for debut story collections, which is get an MFA, publish in XYZ journals, and that shouldn't be the convention. I'm so glad that this collection exists outside of that. So I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, I guess I started writing short stories when I was maybe 26 or 27 on the side. And I'd always had an office job. I moved to LA in late 2014. And yeah, I was like was always writing on the weekends. I was making little zines with my best friend, and I kind of knew that I just really wanted to go for it. And if I wanted to take it seriously, I needed to do something kind of insane for me, which was quit my job. And that was the first time I had ever not been employed, and without really like a plan. So it took me a while, actually, just logistically, to save up just for a few months to live off of. And then I figured I'll figure it out once I get to that point. I just need to carve out some time to really focus on this. And so I did that in October, I think, of 2018. And yeah, I wrote most of the collection from then until about 2020. And, you know, it always sounds really like clean in hindsight. It all feels like it was meant to be, but it was I like to call that like my dark night of the soul season, because for a year it was really kind of trying to figure out how to exist as a writer and what that meant, and kind of what I did with my days now that I didn't have any structure or like a container to exist within. And that was kind of more of like an inner journey of totally freaking out and feeling like what am I doing? Because I didn't sort of have those markers of like, I didn't know, I think I knew like one other published author, and a lot of my friends are artists, which did help a lot, just to feel like, okay, that was sort of something that I could pursue, but I didn't really have a ton of models or mentors. And so I had to kind of seek that out for myself and almost give myself my own MFA experience. So I would like submit to writing competitions, and I went to a writer's residency, and I did workshops. So I kind of tried to, get the lay of the land of the literary world, and really like immerse myself and kind of put myself out there and reach out to writers. And I felt like I was met with so much kindness from writers that I admire so much. And that was kind of my path. But I think what's exciting is that there is a different path for everyone, especially now. You can kind of, especially with the internet, it feels more possible or something. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's possible to DIY an MFA, and it seems like that's kind of what you did. And it's probably a lot cheaper and less disruptive to your adult life. So it's a very inspiring story, and it clearly has paid off for you. So congratulations. And, your collection is, deeply funny and wonderfully strange. And it's really guided by this singular voice, and it's very character driven. So I would love to talk about your characters. They occupy this really interesting paradox of being paralyzed by inaction in their day-to-day lives because existing is just intolerable to them. Yet they engage in these hilariously compulsive behaviors as the way to kind of like relieve that stasis. And so, yeah, can you talk about how you arrived at this idea of exploring impulsive behavior and bad thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always been really in my own head and sort of fascinated with like watching how people perform in the world. Obviously, living in LA, I see that a lot. And, being more of an introvert, kind of just going to parties and like observing. So I felt like, there's this like whole other reality that I was occupying internally that no one could see. And I think that's sort of like a maddening thing, like this incompatibility between like our external performance and what's going on really inside. And for me, I kind of just wanted to explore these characters that were a very absurdist, kind of exaggerated, satirical version of some of maybe my most worst tendencies.
Right.
And I think like using humor can be really disarming and allow people to sort of, I don't know, see themselves in that, whether it's waiting for an email that you think is going to change your life. Like I've refreshed my email for the last 3 years, but I'm like, what would it look like for a character to just like kind of destroy her life and alienate everyone around her, in the hopes of receiving this one email that, you know, you put so much into it. And so, yeah, it's really fun to kind of occupy those different characters who all kind of share the same, I guess, restlessness and isolation and everything that we're all sort of experiencing in the modern world. And yeah, and not really kind of come to a conclusion of, you know, really trying to lay it out there to be like, we're all good and bad, you know, there's more nuance to all of it. You can kind of, they're on their like misguided hero's journey, and they're these like anti-heroes, and you can empathize even though they're horrible. And those are my favorite characters to read. So
yeah, I mean, these are incredibly likable stories about often unlikable people. But I mean, even that term to me, I don't love it, because I tend to love unlikable characters, therefore they're likable to me. So many of these characters, like, they have this similar affliction they're suffering from, which is like delusions of their own specialness and kind of the lengths they will go to be seen. And so I found that very compelling. How did you kind of maintain that theme with the singular voice while differentiating each premise? Because the stories feel very different. Did you work with writing prompts, or did you kind of arrive at these ideas organically?
Yeah, I typically don't plan out a story. What I have a kind of long running notes app, and, you know, documents that just have these really anything that comes to me, and I think I'd be horrified if anyone found it so much embarrassing stuff. But what will happen is I'll scroll through it and I'll be like, okay, there's obviously like a theme here. I seem to be preoccupied with this one thing, or it'll be some scene that's sort of nagging at me, and then I just want to keep exploring it and create this vignette of the short story around it. And so that's sort of been my approach. And then I guess with the voice, like, I really was sort of singularly working on it for a long period of time, and I think maybe that helped. I sort of, that's more speaks to maybe my limitations. Like, I wish I could kind of multitask and work on multiple projects, but I think that ended up making it feel very cohesive. It really encapsulates a very specific time in my life of being single, and then dating and getting married, and late 20s, early 30s in LA, and coming up against all of these young person but not young enough to be making these mistakes type things. And I felt like, yeah, I thought that might be relatable. But as you know, for so long you write these things, and it's not like I knew for sure that there would ever be an audience. I think when you see all the press and the book coming out, and it feels like like the person that wrote that was just really writing it for herself and her friends, and with hope that it would find an audience. But it's been cool, even just the past couple of days, getting messages from a lot of women who have started reading it and resonate, and that's still so surreal to me, and like totally blowing my mind, and I love it. It's definitely not gotten old at all. Yeah.
Well, it's just beginning. Yeah, I mean, the stories feel like you're having fun writing them, and you're really amusing yourself, and you're also amusing us. So it's really working. These stories are set in LA, but they seem more concerned with like character consciousness than like describing the palm trees. But they feel very LA in their preoccupations with like new age spirituality and celebrity and influencers and social media, and even The Bachelorette, one of the stories that I love very much. So can you tell us how place is important to you as a writer and how it factors into your work? And do you foresee yourself like continuing to inhabit LA while you're writing?
Yeah, I don't even think that it was as intentional. I think it was fairly natural, just that I was so immersed in being in LA. And, I'm Canadian, so growing up, LA was like such a fantasy world that I didn't even know how people could live there, and I had always wanted to, and so it's still, I had this idea of it, and then coming here is just like so bizarre to be like, okay, I live here now, and I think I had the benefit of, you know, being an immigrant, or, you know, like having that more of an outsider perspective of like, you just have this different framework where you're like, this is not normal. Like, I don't know, my husband grew up in Orange County, and it's so bizarre to me that people just grow up near the beach and it's like so beautiful and sunny all the time. And so I think, yeah, that was just sort of like a natural, I think, extension of me just observing my world. And, you know, like I love books that are really set in interiority, like Sheila Heti, more of what's going on kind of in someone's head, irregardless of where it's set. You know, I don't know that I'll ever be super plot heavy. I guess maybe my novel is a little bit more, but I think it's like the conversations that my friends and I are constantly having are about what we're feeling, and therapy stuff and psychology, and spirituality. So it feels like those are the sort of things that really light me up. And, you know, even the other week I was out at a bar with, there was a bunch of guy friends, some I knew, some I didn't, and then their wives and me. And I just sort of observed the way that straight men sort of shout references at each other, and that's their sort of primary form of communication oftentimes. And it's like, that I could not even contribute one thing. They were just like, Beastie Boys, like whatever. They're talking about albums, and I was like, it just, you know, I guess that's how they bond. But usually when I meet someone, I'm like, tell me about your childhood trauma immediately, or you know, like, I just kind of want to get to how strange it is to be a person, and why we're all here, and how we feel about that. So.
Yeah, I've certainly been caught in some male circles where they're just repeating movie lines, and I'm just standing there like, yeah, so been there. And yeah, and speaking of kind of like these interior thoughts, the chapters are, or the stories are broken up by these Twitter-esque musings that are very funny, and they're kind of like a distillation of your themes. And I thought that was like a really interesting choice, and it works really well. How did you decide to include those? And was there like a rhyme or reason to how you ordered them and where you placed them in the collection?
Yeah, so I started writing them, I think it was in 2019. I had 2 weeks of, I had vertigo, and I'd never had that before, and I was totally freaked out. I felt like standing felt like being on a cruise ship, and so I was in bed for 2 weeks. And not that that's like actually that different from like me writing, because I'm usually in bed. I had this idea. I was like, I'm just gonna write down every thought that I have, and I called it Bad Thoughts. And I was about to do a reading at my friend's warehouse in Boyle Heights, and I was like, I think the theme should be bad thoughts, and I think all the readers should kind of write around this theme. And that sort of came out of nowhere, and I just sort of went with it. And I have been accumulating all of these sort of one-liner tweets, which now that I realize I should probably just tweet them, but I got on Twitter so late that it's like, it's so embarrassing. It's like coming to a party late and like everyone's already in a conversation. You're like, how do I? So I'm bad at Twitter. But anyway, so I had, and then I started sharing them on Instagram, actually, because that's sort of more where I'm at during COVID, as a way to kind of like an exercise in like getting over myself, because I had been hoarding these short stories and I was so precious about them, and a lot of people didn't even know what I was doing, and I thought, you know, maybe I'll just throw these out and see if it resonates, and that was like hugely validating for me, because I felt like, you know, everybody was on their phones, and people seemed to like them, and when I sold the collection, we knew we wanted to call the book Bad Thoughts, and I thought, you know, it would be cool to have these interstitial bad thoughts. And so I kind of picked them out of the endless page is a bad one. There are so many worse ones. And I categorize them into different themes like technology and relationships and that sort of thing. And then so there is a loose theme, but it's, mostly just kind of feeling it out, how it works with the other stories. So, yeah.
Very cool. You also made this series of short films that are very cool. And they are similarly like a distillation of your stories. They capture the vibe, but visually. So can you tell me a bit about kind of like your multimedia background, and how that worked?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always knew I wanted to do a book trailer. It just seemed like such a fun excuse to work with my friends. And living in LA, I know a lot of filmmakers and directors and photographers and stuff. And so I asked one of my oldest friends, Brandon Tauzik, who's a director. We had worked on stuff when I was working in the corporate world. I was like, do you want to do these little book trailers with me? And, we both didn't really have a huge budget, but he has a production company, and he brought them on board and was just so kind and generous, and made it super professional. And we shot it on film, and we cast a bunch of our friends who are artists in LA. And for me, it was, really an antidote to like the years of being alone with this project. And also, in addition to that, I think, not being a known quantity and just really being a new writer, you do sort of feel like you have to think outside the box in terms of how to create stories and moments around the book launch. And so I knew, I was like, we could premiere it in a magazine. We could have an event. We had an event at Noy House. And so these are just like ways to bring people in, because it's so difficult, I think, to get people's attention and cut through the noise of being online. And especially, it's a big ask, I think, to get people to read a book and be interested in a book. And so I thought, okay, well, the internet is very visual. Maybe this might pique people's interests if they see these little weird so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's great branding. As someone who's worked in marketing, it's like, it's perfect. So,
yeah,
and writers have that burden of being like responsible for so much of their own PR and constantly promoting themselves. And it's like a way to do that where you don't have to be like face first. So I think that's really smart. And they're also, they're just very funny. And I recommend everyone who's watching, watch those videos.
Yeah.
And, as we've mentioned, the book is incredibly funny. There's so many potent lines and so many absurdist twists. Like, I'm still laughing about two characters who role play footsteps in the sand. Like, that was just so ridiculous to me. And so I'm interested in like what your relationship is with comedy. Do you consider yourself a comic writer or a satirist? And how do you balance like those comic moments with like the more heartfelt?
Yeah, I do feel like self-identifying as a funny person is illegal. Like, it should be like not for me to say. But thank you so much. I really tried hard to be funny. And yeah, I definitely like grew up watching stand-up and SNL and Mad TV, and I'm so obsessed with comedy, and I go to a lot of comedy shows here in LA, and I do see it as such a like high art, and those are the types of books that I gravitate towards. Obviously, I can appreciate all types and dramas and that sort of thing. Depends on my mood, but usually life is just so bleak that I want to laugh at how absurd it is, and there wouldn't have been any other way for me to have approached it, because that's sort of that's the voice that I want to occupy. And it's been interesting in how I'm sort of parlaying this into like performance and doing readings and stuff. Like, I'm doing a multimedia performance from my book at the Elysian Theater, which is like this indie comedy improv theater that's so cool. I created this like PowerPoint presentation to go along with my reading, sort of like having a visual aid that makes it even more absurdist. So that'll be fun. But yeah, no, I just love humor, and I love like Patricia Lockwood and Melissa Broder, and yeah, like Alyssa Nutting. I just think that there's so many really great contemporary fiction writers that are super, super funny. And yeah.
Yeah, I think being funny or having the goal of being funny takes some of the pressure off of writing, because you're less self-serious, you're less concerned with writing like a capital N novel. So I think that, that's a really good angle, and you are very funny on the page. So I laughed a lot reading this, constantly, actually.
Great.
And speaking of making art, and I loved all of these stories, and in one of them, it's called Giving Up. The character is sort of this middling artist, and she experiences this delirious joy and freedom by giving up making art. And I think lots of artists have this like perverse fantasy of doing that, because making art can just feel like a constant fight against your own insignificance. And she just finally gives into it and like goes to the mall and eats a soft pretzel, and it's fabulous. And I love that story. But that said, I would love to learn more about what your writing process is like. How do you discipline yourself? And if you have any tips for other writers on not giving up like this character did.
Yeah, that was a running joke with my best friend and I of like, wouldn't it be so nice to give up? Meaning, no one would care. Like it was just an idea mostly in our heads. And of course that character is definitely like fetishizing like regular people, like, like she's doing the real work, which I often could relate to, as I spend many days banging my head against the wall, getting, not being productive, and then having to go to CVS after and just watching real people in the world doing real things and feeling terrible about myself. So to that, my process is mired in guilt and shame. But it actually took me a really long time to figure out what worked for me. And also, I will say, when I became a writer fully and quit my job, what I did was I absorbed, every literary podcast and interview, and so I would say my advice is really, maybe don't do that when you haven't figured out your own thing yet, because I was deeply affected by reading, these like comically perfect morning routines that certain artists would have, where they would be like, I wake up at 5 a.m. and then I write and then I meditate, and and I'm like, I am a garbage person. Like, I don't do that, and that really affected me. And then, as I got more comfortable in my own routine, I met more writers. I guess I'm really naive, but I realized like people just lie in interviews. Like they just want to sound cool. So, like, don't believe everything you read. But and some people, of course, are militant in their approach, and that is what works for them. But for me, I had to create an environment where that's all that I could do. And I had to create such high stakes to do it, because otherwise I don't think I would do anything else but that. I would vacuum, I would freelance, whatever. But that's what I had to do. And I'm careful not to suggest that anyone do what I did, because I sort of feel like my journey was quite punishing in a lot of ways. And I was at the beginning not very kind to myself. And, and I guess maybe that was the way that I forged a more compassionate relationship to myself in my creative life, was sort of learning that wasn't the way, and that I had to sort of be a little bit gentler if I wanted to write in, especially if I wanted to write in like a playful voice that was sort of silly, and I couldn't be miserable, so Yeah,
so
I
you
don't know.
don't get up at 5 a.m. every day and write for 8 hours.
I don't think I've ever seen 5 a.m. Like, I don't know what it looks like. I don't know who is out there. It's funny because like people really are who they are. And I think, of course, you can grow and change, but like my best friend, for example, has always been a night owl. And at first I thought she's just being lazy. This was a character defect, but no, biologically, she simply has to stay up until 4 a.m. painting and wakes up at noon or 1 or 3 or whatever. And that is her process. And I think you kind of just have to like own it, you know? And so for me, less romantically, I perform best between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And then after that, I'm just absolutely so dead to the world that I don't know what I do with myself. Yeah.
And as we previously discussed, you were kind of like, DIYing an MFA and writing a bit outside of a literary community, but you had lots of artist friends. How does it feel now to kind of be embraced by a literary community? Do you feel like your characters that you still need to kind of maintain this outsider status to do the kind of work that you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like the whole way I was embraced by writers, friends that I'd made. And I know that that's not everyone's experience of the literary world. I've found people to be so generous with their time and so kind to me and gave me so many opportunities. So I feel really lucky in that sense. Of course, I suffered many micro humiliations of being rejected constantly too, but that's sort of a part of it, right? And yeah, it's interesting to, I've had like a couple of interviews and the last couple of days have been events and stuff, and people will sort of be like, well, how does it feel? And it's like too fresh for me to even narrativize my experience. I feel like I haven't really even had a moment to reflect on just like the magnitude. I'll have little moments where I'll sort of look out at a crowd and be like, they're here for me, or but it is so surreal. And I'm sort of the person that processes things a little bit more in hindsight in the privacy of my room, just like looking at photos again. But in the moment, it's actually quite intimidating still. I'm fairly new to, I think there was 1 week where I did an interview every day and I was just like, I don't even know if I make any sense anymore. But yeah, the joy of just like learning in public as I go. So I definitely still feel so new and like an outsider, but I don't even really know what that means anymore because I do have a community of writer friends who are awesome and have helped me so much. Yeah.
Awesome. That's so cool. And so a lot of the themes that you explore in these stories, it's, this desire to be seen, motherhood, familial relationships. As you were writing these stories, did you kind of know that those were your preoccupations, or did they kind of emerge after the fact? I feel like it's often readers who alert us to our themes and we're like, yeah, that's what I was going for. That sounds smart. So were you kind of aware of what you were kind of going for in these stories?
No, not while I was writing it, to the point where I did a podcast yesterday and the host was like, so you seem to struggle with anxiety. And I truly had never considered that before. I just thought that was everyone's natural state. And so I am shocked by what is being reflected back to me. I mean, obviously I overthink everything. So of course everything's crossed my mind, but that's really been like the interesting part of all of this, the magic trick of writing something and then reviewing it and having a certain truth be revealed to you. It does feel almost like a spiritual thing. And, I wrote this essay that's going to be in Harper's Bazaar, actually about discovering this Jungian archetype called the puella eterna. So it's like the opposite of, or the female version of the Peter Pan. So more commonly known as the fuck boy, or the eternal bachelor. It was so revelatory to me reading about the female version of that, because as I was reading about it, I was like, oh no, that is me, and I would say I am recovering, or that will always sort of be a part of me. And then when I looked back at my collection, I was like, this is the puella. This is the puella's journey. And by that, I mean women who are sort of stagnating on the precipice of a threshold experience. So that's, in Jungian terms, it's like a threshold is like, like a marker of adulthood, or like where something changes profoundly for you. And so that could be motherhood, that could be marriage, or any number of things. But I think it's really interesting. I'm a millennial, and really feeling kind of like one of the first generations of women to have like this sort of unprecedented, at least historically, like that zoomed out, unprecedented levels of freedom. And so that to me, it's a huge responsibility. And I think that we've more recently culturally heard of the girl boss and, women who can do it all. And I thought, well, what about the women who would like to languish in this sort of extended adolescence where they waste their time and don't really know what they want to do, and are kind of tired and make mistakes, and, are sort of messing up. That is also their right. You do that, as men have done for eons. And obviously that's a super reductive take, but it was an organizing principle. Like, it was a way for me to understand myself and the work that I was doing. And so I loved finding that. I was like, oh yes, this is Jungian.
Yeah, I mean, it unfortunately sounds like my biography, so I'll be very excited to read that essay in Harper's. Yeah, and the stories capture that feeling so beautifully of like women kind of paralyzed by their wants and desires and not knowing what direction to go in, and just ultimately deciding to self-sabotage in some way as a way to like be noticed in a world that kind of has neglected to notice them. So it's all there in like every sentence, and it's perfect. So you did a great job. And before, I know you're going to read for us. So before you do that, can you tell us what's next? I know you're working on a novel. Is there anything you can say about that? Are there more stories forthcoming?
Yeah, so I am working on a novel. I got a 2-book deal, which is insane. So exciting. And it was sort of the first story that I had fully fleshed out. I'd never done that before. All of my short stories, I was sort of just figuring it out as I went along. But this one is very structured, almost like a movie. And that's been an interesting new challenge for me to write with an outline, and also allowing for whatever comes up or whatever direction I want to go into. Still sort of occupying that absurdist voice, but dealing with like intergenerational stuff, the modern obsession with therapy and blaming your parents for everything, and performance artists and delusional characters. And so I'm mining a lot from like my childhood, which has been kind of fun and funny. And my parents are Croatian immigrants, and they moved back to Croatia. And so my mom will just constantly be telling me the most insane stories from the village that they live in, where there's like these 90-year-old women, and they tell her about their lives, and she'll kind of bring it to me as like research or something. And I'm like, cool. Yeah, so that's been fun to work on. This summer I feel like is a little bit of a wash because I'm doing so many events and stuff for this book, which is so fun, and just so surreal. But yeah, so that'll be like my next. I'll return back to my little hole and working alone every day again. Can't wait.
Well, I absolutely loved this collection, and people are going to love this collection. Everybody should buy it. And I'm very excited for your novel. That will be great. But can you give us a taste and read an excerpt for us right now?
Yeah, definitely. I can read from a story called Tug, Spin, Release. And here we go. Okay. What if this is hell? I'd been repeating it to myself ever since Heather's little sister Claire offered up her grim diagnosis of reality. It was a passing philosophical musing from a slightly buzzed 20-something wearing cowboy boots and a sash that read Bride Tribe, but it stuck with me. You mean the Pueblo Bonita Pacifica? I joked, referring to the cheesy, all-inclusive resort we had booked for Heather's bachelorette weekend in Cabo. Our room had gaudy Spanish-style decor and faded cream carpeting that had an Orange County divorcee-type ambiance to it, but no one cared because we needed it only for the express purpose of doing drugs and sleeping. I wanted to remind Claire that this hell seemed fairly benign compared to most people's, like the arthritic cleaning lady who had come by to unclog the toilet for a second time that day. But I knew what she meant. Everyone suffers, but how that suffering is doled out is unique to each person. I was comforted by the thought and nearly offered the platitude about being kind because everyone is fighting a hard battle, but I didn't know the exact phrasing and had just taken 2 edible cookies and was too self-conscious to get it wrong in front of the group. I'd met Heather through my friend Amelia, who couldn't travel due to health issues, making me a second-tier invite. I was fine with this and had committed myself to consuming twice as much of everything in Amelia's honor. It's what she would have wanted. I was struggling to get into a rhythm with the other women, mostly because my mind was elsewhere. I was waiting for an email that was going to change my life, but the cell reception was weak and my inbox wouldn't refresh no matter how many times I tugged and released the screen. Days earlier, on a whim, I'd submitted a few poems about birds and spit and the texture of velvet to a prestigious artist residency program in upstate New York. The prize involved a month-long stay in a private cabin, which was enough time for me to finally establish myself as an artist and then figure out a way to stay there for the rest of my life. I could work as a farmhand in exchange for room and board and devote the rest of my time to writing and having deep conversations and casual sex with like-minded people. I'd been writing poems for as long as I could remember, but my only plan up until now had been to eventually die so that my work could be discovered posthumously. I thought of my poetry as my own personal voyager floating through space and time, awaiting contact. My poems wouldn't even have to be great since people tend to be more forgiving of the dead. As a poet, I could think of nothing more romantic. But the residency was much bigger than that. It was my ticket out. Being a middle school phys ed teacher hadn't been my original plan. I thought I'd be a gymnast, like one of those muscular girls who run around twirling ribbons in the air, whatever they're called. Then I turned 12 and my boobs mushroomed practically overnight. Even then, I knew it was over for me. No one aspires to teach gym. It's just something that happens to you through a series of poor choices and an inability to grasp even basic math. The funniest part is that I would have never known about the residency if I hadn't overheard Margaret, the English teacher, discussing it in the break room. Apparently, she was invited last year and stowed away in a cabin for 6 weeks, which makes sense because she suspiciously returned for the fall semester with an entirely new nose. Convenient. Margaret thought she was hot shit because she graduated from an Ivy League and made people call her doctor for some reason, yet there we were in the Eastmont Middle School women's restroom, separated only by a thin partition, desperately waiting for the other to leave. I wasn't built for academia. The girls at school terrified me. They only ever wore sports bras and nothing else, and if I made a comment, they accused me of being a pervert and threatened to sue for sexual harassment. The boys reeked of Jewel and did nothing to hide their erections, which were constant and hypnotizing. I couldn't take my eyes off them. If you want to talk about hell, I wrote poems about how their basketball shorts flapped in the breeze patriotically like flags, but I never showed them to anyone. No one had any idea I could write at all. I hoped that in the coming weeks, I would find out for myself. That's probably good. Yay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump back in here and just ask a couple of questions. If anybody has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. The first question that we have, y'all can see it there, right? I'll read for everybody. I know that a lot of authors before you, i.e. Stephanie Danler, commented on how the press has glamorized and or sexualized her femininity to downplay the hard work that is involved in getting your first book published. Did you feel anything like this in your journey?
I mean, that is definitely a very real thing that I know a lot of my women writer friends struggle with, sort of being taken seriously. And I think personally, I really haven't experienced much of that because I really have sort of been at home in my room and no one has seen me for like 3 years. So being at these events is like my first foray out into public, like, or doing the press and all of that stuff. And so TBD on that, I guess. We'll see. But I know that some writers, you know, they don't want to be classified as, like, I think the category on my, I don't know, Amazon or something is like literally women's fiction, you know. That doesn't really bother me that much. I think that I'm going to resonate with women, and I have, and I'm going to find the right readers, and I don't really feel like diminished by any sort of external categorization. I guess, like, I already sort of took that chance with humor, which a lot of people think is such an unserious thing, you know. So I guess I just try to not pay too much attention to, you know, what people think, I guess.
That's probably a good just rule of thumb for surviving in the world, and especially surviving as a writer or an artist of any kind. But I have a question that's maybe related to that. We were talking about, or you and Margaret were talking about, kind of these narratives we have surrounding becoming a writer and the frameworks and the pathways that we have for that. And my question is, what is one thing so far? I know, you know, no pressure. You're just, you know, it's not far enough yet to kind of narrativize, but what's one thing that has kind of aligned with expectations or, you know, met expectations about this process? And what's one of the things that's been like the most unexpected, surprising elements of, you know, kind of getting published and kind of now being out there and promoting it and being the face of the collection?
Mm-hmm. That is such a great question. I am so endlessly surprised every day. I do feel like so much of this process is very like hurry up and wait. Like, it's like you don't get a single email for years and you're just like, is this just, am I just having a hallucination? Is this even a real thing? And then, you know, the week that you go out and try to sell your book, it's just such an immediate onslaught of like, all right, now you have all these meetings set up, and that can be a little bit jarring because then after you sell it, there is sort of like this window where you kind of don't start immediately editing it even or something. And because I'm so new to this, I really sort of have to lean on, you know, more seasoned writer friends of mine, like my friend Alic Rowbottom. She wrote Jello Girls. She has a novel coming out called Aesthetica. She's really been kind of like a mentor for me. I'm just constantly asking her, like, is this normal? Like, how does this work? And so I'm so grateful to her for her wisdom and that kind of thing. But I would say, like, more immediately, the biggest surprise has been like I said, mostly at home and a total introvert. And I like taking the position of like being at the party in the back and observing everyone, not necessarily being front row. And at my book launch at Skylight, that was sort of my first realization that, oh, I am very nervous and this is not as natural for me, but it had gone so untested. How would I had known, you know, like I feel so comfortable behind a screen or writing, or, you know, I love a thoughtfully worded email. I can really like articulate myself. And so honestly, my biggest surprise has been speaking just off the cuff, and kind of through that process figuring out what I think and feel about things. That's been kind of an interesting thing, and I'm hoping that it'll get easier with time. But to go from being the writer, the, you know, like just kind of doing my own thing, to suddenly being more of the performer or the person that people are listening to and looking at, that has been a huge paradigm shift for me too. And so a lot of firsts for me. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that answer. That really resonates, the kind of having a shift from being able to kind of have space to articulate exactly with writing. And like you said, the emails, I myself love a well-worded email, and to, having to speak extemporaneously. And it can be like another way to discover yourself, which is cool. And it's cool to hear that like you're learning that and experiencing that. It sounds like fun, and I hope you get the chance to enjoy it as much as possible. I'm gonna push through since everyone else is being shy, and just like monopolize your time and ask more of my questions.
Cool.
What either other writers, other books, or even just other media is really like lighting you up or resonating with you right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, right now, what am I even reading? I feel like I've just been working so much. I will say, like, I'm such a fan of story collections, and those always light me up, and they feel like kind of low investment. I can just sort of read a story in the morning before I start my day. And that, the short story writers have really informed my work too. So like, Samantha Hunt, Lori Moore, Amy Bairdale wrote a collection, Ochesa Moshfegh. I just finished Lapvona. Thought that was so great. I know some people think it's crazy, but I love her so much. Other types of media. I mean, all of my friends are artists. My husband is a musician, just constantly listening to people's unfinished albums over and over again. So that's really fun. But other than that, I don't know. It's like, I feel like there's nothing on TV because it's the summer. And so it's just like really been a lot of weird YouTube clips. I really love the show What We Do in the Shadows, and that the series, the new season started, I think 2 days ago. I am obsessed with that show.
We have another question popping up. When you were writing your collection, how did you balance how much you wrote versus how much you read? I feel like both can be considered working. Did you have to limit your reading to actually write? Great question.
Mm-hmm. That is a great question. I do most of, if not all of my reading first thing in the morning. And this is, I realize, me sounding like one of those pretentious writer interview things, but it's really not that. I like to call it microdosing literature, because I will really just read like a few pages or a chapter in the morning, and kind of just to get me going, so that I'm not just like mainlining a screen first thing. Of course, I spend the rest of the day on a screen, various screens actually. So, but I sort of limit it to like, I'm drinking my coffee and I'm reading, and then I'm sort of done with it. And then I go into writing mode. So, that's all I can kind of handle at least right now. Yeah.
Is there a difference? And I may open this question up to both you and Margaret, because I know you both write in both forms, the short story form and the novel form. Is there a difference in your process in terms of, you know, writing a short story versus the longer project of writing a novel?
Yeah, I would say it's a lot more difficult to retain the potency of a short story in a novel form. And so that's been a new kind of muscle that I'm like working on, because it is so much more about kind of a character development over a long period of time. And but then I think what that offers me is a little bit more space to really indulge a character and really kind of move through the world with them, instead of sort of feeling like you're always like in a conversation that's being cut short and you're like trying to fit it all in for brevity's sake. So allowing myself to kind of giving myself permission to just explore a new world has been cool. I don't know. What would you say? I'm curious about your answer to that.
I mean, yeah, for me, it's just about building endurance. So when I first started writing short stories, I couldn't get past 9 pages. Then suddenly it became 13, then 15, then 17, then 22. So I've, you know, through writing short stories, I've built this endurance. And so now I'm learning how to do that in a longer form with a novel. But I agree, you can go on more tangents. You feel like you have more freedom, but that freedom can be really scary. Because a short story feels like this really careful puzzle that I'm putting together. And I'm really just learning what a novel is by writing one. I know how to read one, but I don't know how to write one. But yeah, it's a very different process, but there is like a concern with making sure that like every sentence is alive or funny. And how can you do that over 300 pages of like the same story? So very similar experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those are both really, both wonderful answers, both wonderful guidelines to have in thinking about the journey of becoming a writer and of getting work out there and of producing work. Okay, I guess I will just leave us here with maybe give the writers back 3 minutes that they can spend relaxing or reading or writing or yeah.
Cool.
or tweeting or whatever it is.
I will say this is, now that I've done this is my preferred way to experience an event. I'm literally at home, but I'm with you both. This has been so lovely. Like, yeah, I don't have to find parking in LA. Like, it's great. This is, yeah. So thank you for having me.
I feel it's like kind of the introverts like happy medium of like you have like you still are extemporaneous, you still are with others, but you kind of I love this format. Thank you both so much for being here. It was really an honor. It was so exciting to have you both. Everybody, please click the link or just go to your local independent bookshop. If you're in LA, head to Skylight and get this collection. It's excellent, and we can't wait to see more from both of you excellent writers in the future. Thank you, Nada. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Margaret. It was so great. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.